welcome to the latest episode of Green and Red's Week in Review. This is a brief little news review of the week's events that Bob and I like to talk about, promoting it exclusively on YouTube. And so as you're watching this on YouTube, if you haven't already, hit that subscribe button. And if you are checking us out on social media, share this, please. And then another thing to note, as Bob is flashing there before our screen, is the Green and Red postcard, which we actually just got made. And the Green and Red postcard is to help us promote the podcast. And so if you want to help grow the mighty Green and Red podcast, you can email us at greenredpodcast@gmail.com and we can send you a packet of postcards. We're already actually mailing some out. People have already asked for some. And if you want to make a donation to also help support the postcard fund, you can go to greenredpodcast.org and hit the support button, or become a patron at patreon.com/greenredpodcast and join our mighty donor base, patron base. We have 17 patrons. It's actually been growing in the last week, and we want to hit 20 in the next week or so. So please become a patron of the Green and Red podcast.
Yep, Chocolate Trap House, which brings in $2 million a year, is starting to fear us. I'm pretty sure that they're starting to kind of like look over their shoulder in the rearview mirror.
We're the guerrilla political left guerrilla podcast, and so the New York crews should be afraid, because we're coming up hard and we're coming up fast.
We are in the Sierra Maestre of the podcast world. So
it's true.
And TGRIF, thank Green and Red, it's Friday. So
yep.
What are we going to talk about today? What are we going to gripe and rant about today?
We're going to talk a little bit about Haiti. We're going to talk a little bit about recalls, and we're going to talk a little bit about why the Democrats are so lame. But to kick it off, we want to just note the passing of a gentleman, Saadi Youssef. Saadi Youssef was actually the actor, the sort of star of the film The Battle of Algiers, which was a Gillo Pontecorvo film about Algerian resistance to the French colonial rule. He passed away at 93. Real important thing about Saadi Youssef is that he wasn't just an actor in the film. He was actually the leader, one of the leaders of the Algerian Revolution against the French. He actually was jailed, tortured. He actually didn't think he was going to get out of jail, but then he passed away this week at the age of 93. And he was very much actually a catalyst for why the film was made. Once the revolution ended, he went and sought out Pontecorvo, and they made the film. So we want to have a shout out of rest in power to Saadi Youssef.
Presente. Also, speaking of the Battle of Algiers, a little teaser here. Green and Red, we're branching out the Green and Red media empire, and so make sure you stay tuned, because Scott and I will soon be presenting our favorite radical movies ever, political radical movies. And so if you're saying what should I watch on Netflix tonight? Make sure you listen to this and tell everybody about it, because we're going to tell you, like, in our estimations, and Scott's way better at this, he's more of a film critic than I am, what the best radical political movies are. And you can write them all down, and then you'll have all kinds of stuff to do on the weekend. So that's just a teaser, just a little trailer there. So what's going on in Haiti? Any news in Haiti?
Any news in Haiti?
Yeah.
I mean, we want to kind of touch on this. The news of the week related to Haiti is that at the border in Texas, about 1,500 Haitian immigrants had gone into Mexico and then crossed the border at Texas. And then we saw the Border Patrol actually break up the encampment. And we see these horrible images of Border Patrol on horseback with whips and things like that, basically, scattering this Haitian immigrant encampment. It's like terrible. It's like, mothers with children trying to run away with diapers and food and things like that, while this overly militarized Border Patrol is just like attacking. And this is not an outlier of behavior by the Border Patrol by any means, but it's one that has like kind of captured national and global attention. And then the sort of on top of that, the Biden administration actually deported the immigrants, the ones who were caught, and deported them back to Haiti. And so we're going to talk a little bit about Haiti right now, just because the instability and the violence and the what's going on in Haiti, all of that in Haiti is actually a direct result of U.S. colonialism, neocolonialism, whatever you want to say. And so, Bob, I want you to tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, first, I mean, like people with historical analogies often kind of get glib and stuff, but those images actually struck me as kind of very similar to what you would see in a plantation in the 1850s in the South. It was really like brutal and cruel. The entire immigration debate in the U.S., because that's one area, one issue on which, even Democrats, I mean, they're maybe not as bad, but most, I think, Americans are essentially say we don't need any more immigrants, and they may not want to build a wall, but they don't want to let people in either. And Biden has sent Kamala Harris to the region to say, hey, don't come here. So there's already the city, but what's kind of lost in a lot of this, I think, is, as you pointed out, is that there's a long and brutal history of American colonialism in many forms in that region. Typically more kind of economic colonialism than actual like European style, but nonetheless. And Haiti, I think, catches the brunt of that. So, there's a real reason, why Haitians would be trying to get into the United States. By the way, what Biden's deporting is a violation of international law, or American law and international law, because by law, you are allowed a hearing in that country you're trying to emigrate to. So they should be given a hearing in the US. That's just the law that all these liberals were attacking Trump for, right? So, but Haiti, I mean, the Haitian Revolution, which was led by Toussaint Louverture, was a slave-based, really the only slave-based revolution, lasted until from like 1790, early 1790s until the early 1800s, and it was in large measure actually the reason for the Louisiana Purchase, because the French had this vision of having this big empire of sugar production in the Caribbean, and once they realized that they were losing Haiti, they decided to just kind of cut a bit. And so that's why they sold that area. I'm sorry, they sold Louisiana, which would the Gulf would be the basis for sugar exports. That's why they sold it to Thomas Jefferson. But at any rate, I digest. Haiti's been essentially an American colony for about a half century after the Haitian Revolution. The new government was still paying off the old French colonial debt to the United States. So they, this very poor, impoverished country. And Haiti's basically probably
Founded by former slaves.
By former slaves, right? Basically the poorest country, certainly in the Western Hemisphere. I don't know. Afghanistan and Haiti, I think, are probably about, like the two poorest places in the world right now on earth. And, as too, I mean, the United States has always had immense control. In 1915, there was kind of a revolution sort of in Haiti. The United States sent troops down there to take over the customs houses and the charnel houses. And Franklin Roosevelt, who was I think, Assistant Secretary of the Navy, went down there and claimed, along with William Jennings Bryan, who was the Secretary of State, and claimed, FDR claimed that he wrote the Haitian Revolution, bragged about it. And, in the later 20th century, Haiti was run by the Duvalier family, Papa Doc and Baby Doc Duvalier, who were just brutal despots who were funded by the United States. And then in the early 90s, I believe, there was kind of a people's revolution, I guess you call it, led by a priest, I know Juan, no, I forget his first name, Aristide. And the Clintons, who liberals love so much, I believe, had a few issues with him, didn't they?
Yeah, I mean, he came in after the Duvaliers, which were this brutal dictatorship for half a century or what have you, that were thrown out, I believe, in the 80s, in the late 80s, and he was looking to do a little bit of reform and a little bit of like pushing back on the
Aristide kind of came out sort of a liberation theology background, I believe.
Yeah.
And it's funny because, Duvalier never had elections, or he had these phony elections, but the Clintons decided that, Aristide was going to be held accountable. And so they essentially forced him out. this guy who, represented, a little bit, I mean, very popular, especially among the poor people in Haiti, in the slums of Haiti. And so the Clintons, in their quest to neoliberalize the world, and, I mean, that's like
starting with their own backyard,
yeah. Well, it's always like there's like a lot of people have studied this. There's always been this idea that Latin America and the Caribbean have been kind of a laboratory, breeding grounds for kind of the US, so they can learn how to like do this stuff and then go do it in other parts of the world too. You try out a lot of this shit first in that area. And Haiti's always been like, one of the easy targets. And one of the things that sucks about Trump is that like people justifiably loathe him and despise him, but it kind of, leads a lot of liberals, especially, to not really question or look back at like Clinton and Obama, the Clintons and Obama. What I'm seeing now, which I kind of enjoy as a scholar, is that people are starting to really kind of look at Obama with great disdain. So the kind of stuff you and I were saying, like 12 years ago when people were giving a shit about it, I think it's becoming a lot more easy to get away with. So, but
I find it quite interesting as we're seeing, particularly younger generations becoming more politicized and even more radicalized. Is the critique of the Clintons and the Obamas? I mean, for those folks, there'll always be the critique of the Bushes and the Trumps. But the Clintons and the Obamas being held to account for their foreign policy adventurism, for their pushing of neoliberal agendas, like domestically and abroad, I think it's an interesting sort of turn of events. I also think that in some ways, I actually think Biden at heart is going to be a neoliberal war hawk, et cetera. But there seems to be a little bit of a difference going on with some of what Biden does versus the Obamas and the Clintons. It seems to be shifting away a little bit at some level in some of the neoliberal.
Yeah, I mean, he's kind of, I think
it's probably superficial. But still.
Well, it is, and I think he just recognized the world is in like such grave peril right now that But like I said, I give Biden an F+ rather than just an F. So. But and then Haiti, of course, recently we've had fireworks there. It's a story that I really can't figure out. Really, I haven't figured out quite yet, but. In early July, the president, Jovenel Moise, I believe was his name, was assassinated by a team of Colombians and Haitian Americans who, as they entered the palace to assassinate him, yelled, "DEA, DEA." I believe, was this an episode of Miami Vice? Maybe, I don't know, but I think Miles Davis was in it. At any rate, and turns out that, in fact, some of them, it's been verified now, were in fact DEA informants. It's a weird thing because when we say it was pretty much a neoliberal president, but if the Colombians are involved, then the U.S. kind of had to know about it because Colombia is kind of like Haiti, right? And these Haitian Americans, obviously, they're kind of like the Cuban Americans, right? They're operating. I mean, Miami is now the headquarters for every fucking lunatic right-wing nut from Latin America that flees the country, right? You're starting to see the kind of Venezuelans, the anti-Chavista Venezuelans there, and obviously the Cuban crazies are there, and New Politics is right behind them all the way, and so there are Haitian Americans too, very conservative Haitian Americans there, part of the oligarchy. But it's just a weird thing. But at any rate, the point here, I think that both of us would agree on is that there's a good. I'm surprised actually that there's only, is it 1,500 or 15,000 Haitians at the border, but it should be like 1.5 million. Like if anybody, like when the left, and I'm as guilty of this as anybody. Like I've been involved in many anti-intervention movements, and like Haiti's never really part of it. We've talked about Central America, Nicaragua, El Salvador, Cuba is a big one, right? Venezuela, Bolivia. But like even the left, we really, and there's clearly got to be like a racial aspect to this. There's a great article in Black Agenda Report last week, I think, or this week or last week about that. But Haiti's always just forgotten by everybody. So the fact that Haitians are at the border is no surprise. And if anybody is owed, that's kind of the unspoken part, I think, about the whole immigration controversy. Is like these people are like NAFTA forced a ton of people off the land throughout, tomato farmers in Mexico and, and American colonialism, and preference for the oligarchy there has just forced the sanctions in Venezuela, long-term embargo of Cuba, is just American empire, American imperialism has created this immigration crisis, and the desirability on behalf of American corporations to get really cheap labor has fed it as well. Like, the consumers are these American corporations who bring all these immigrants in. They never get in fucking trouble. Nobody cares about them, but the immigrants are attacked, right? So it's an ugly situation. And these scenes of these guys on horseback with whips, they look like this is horrific imagery, like from the days of slavery and the plantations. The terrifying stuff. And
yeah, it's horrifying.
It's funny.
And
I don't know. It's not. Oh, go ahead. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
it's horrifying, and it's the Border Patrol is a pretty reactionary
That's a scary group of fucking people, yeah.
agency. And if you follow what happens at the border, like when the immigrant caravan was coming up from Central America in 2018, is that people who show up at where there are border walls and where there's borders where there are patrolled by the Border Patrol, it's like they respond often with non-lethal weaponry, but very violently.
Yeah.
Water cannons, tear gas, pepper spray, all of that sort of thing. And so
a large number of sexual assaults. I mean, it's
yep.
I don't really like the whole kind of Nazi fascist and all analogies, but the Border Patrol is kind of like the SS. They're out there. Yeah, they're motherfuckers.
Also the same people who were put into those Department of Homeland Security attack squads that went to places like Portland last year.
Yeah.
That was
no, they're brutal, they're vicious. And in fact, I mean, that's kind of one of the reasons that the Republicans did so surprisingly well in Texas, because the Border Patrol union, which was actually, it's heavily like Hispanic, really went out and lobbied extensively, for Trump. So that's a scary institution. Another part of this that is not really funny, but kind of like, a schadenfreude maybe, is Kamala Harris last night. And, I'm not a fan, obviously, but Biden gave her like the worst fucking job in the world, which she's like the point person on immigration issues. She's the one who went to, was it Guatemala, and said, don't come here. And last night there was a reception at the Naval Observatory for the Congressional Black Caucus, and they lit into her about this. And I mean, I don't feel sorry for her, but it's kind of ironic that, like, I kind of wonder if she kind of encouraged it just because, she's been taking all this shit and she wants to dump some of it on Biden. But, it's just Biden, I don't feel sorry for him, but it is kind of ironic that he's getting attacked by the media so harshly. I think, Trump was so great for the media. I mean, he made them tons of money. And, with him gone, they've lost so much of their appeal. It's like 2.5 Men after Charlie Sheen left. Who gave a shit? I didn't want to see Ashton Kutcher. I never watched it again. But, with Trump gone, and I don't mean to insult Charlie Sheen, who I actually respect and admire a great deal, because he's always winning for real, unlike Trump, who just claims to be, right? So I guess they just, like, with Trump gone, they need something to do, so they're attacking Biden over this stuff, which is like, he kind of deserves it, but it's also kind of ironic and striking. But at any rate, Kamala Harris got slammed last night on this Haitian immigrant thing, and I mean, they really are the fucking Washington Generals. They really are.
And the kind of like along that line, I mean, they are like tanking too. It's like talking about the press, like now they're saying that Biden his approval numbers have gone down, his disapproval numbers have gone up. There was a poll, or maybe like a Pew Research poll, coming out and saying that Trump was more popular than Biden at the moment, which is like unfathomable at this moment, after the last 4 years, or the 4 years we had of Trump. And so I don't know, Bob, why do you have some thoughts on why, one, Biden is tanking, and then two, why the Democrats are so lame? Why are they so unable? Like, we're in a moment with a pandemic, with like 600,000 Americans have died. we've been in these forever wars for 20 years, which Biden actually ended because popular opinion wanted that. We have climate disaster happening in the West. We have climate disaster happening on the Gulf Coast and in the Northeast. And I'm wondering, why are the Democrats unable to muster ever, but in this moment?
I think we need Sigmund Freud to figure that out. As a historian, I mean, honestly, it's really staggeringly amazing that the GOP just does this stuff and knows that there'll be no consequence for it, and they double down. And Bernie Sanders said something that you and I have said on this podcast dozens of times the other day. I forget what he was talking about specifically, but he said, we have big majorities on all these issues, and yet they play as if they're like, just begging for crumbs. But I guess it was on the 3.5 trillion, that's over 10 years, by the way. So that's 350 billion a year, which is way less than half of the Pentagon budget. So we're not talking, actually 3.5 trillion is not a significant amount. It's insignificant compared to the needs. But I don't know. I mean, the GOP, no matter how batshit Trump got, decided to follow him to the gates of hell. Whereas with the Democrats, you have President Joe Manchin, who's apparently quite willing to give power to President Donald Trump on January 20th, 2025. I have no clue. I think we've talked about this a million times. I think, there's a lot of simplistic and probably accurate reasons for Trump. I think in 2016, I didn't like people who said they're a bunch of racist yahoos and all that kind of stuff. In 2020, it was kind of hard to deny that there was clearly a very strong element of that kind of racial animus. But I think one thing that liberals don't want to deal with is that there is, and I believe it's true, this incredible sense of elitism and condescension among the Democratic Party, going back to the deplorables remark, to Nancy Dove-Bar Pelosi showing off her, $25,000 refrigerator full of fancy ice cream. A bunch of Democratic politicians during COVID last year, during the lockdowns, were doing little TikTok videos and things like that, in scenes that an average typical American couldn't participate.
Gavin Newsom having an unmasked dinner
and
December at the French Laundry.
And your mayor just did too, right?
London, yeah, I think so. Yeah,
London Breed, just London 2 days ago. Yeah. She did in 1929, when the Depression, when the market crashed, the Depression was already ongoing. But people told Herbert Hoover's first line was to just maintain business as usual, voluntarily. He asked businesses not to bank, banks not to close, corporations not to shut down, and he wanted to maintain kind of a business as usual attitude. Kind of like Kevin Bacon in Animal House, all is calm. And so his advisors, as part of this, started to do photo ops to show that life was just proceeding as normal, even though the economy had crashed. And one of the photos they released was of him feeding scraps to his dog. He's feeding steak scraps to his dog, which didn't go over well because most Americans were dumpster diving for half-eaten apples, and he's feeding steak to his dogs. And this is
the local rat population,
right? And this is 90 years later. I hadn't learned a fucking thing. I really don't know. It's stunning. Any political party that fomented January 6th, as incompetent as it fucking was, any political party that alienated the JCS to the point where they would call China and say, don't worry, we got this under control. Any political party that could piss off Wall Street to the point where they were going to do whatever they had to make sure he wasn't president again. Any political party, I could go on and on and on. I mean, it should be at what, 10, 15% popularity, maybe?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it's the appeal is so limited to what they are with what they do, which is increasingly outrageous. And yet they have, as you say, the Washington Journals of Politics are their opponents who parade themselves with $25,000 refrigerators eating fancy ice cream and go unmasked while they dine at fancy California restaurants. Talk about a clash of civilizations and a clash of worldviews, and yet the those who are more sane continue to be unable to, deal with those who are less sane.
Well, I mean, it's clear, and we've said this before. I mean, and I'm not the biggest Bernie Sanders fan. We were talking with Mike Ogg a few weeks ago about like Walter Mondale, and those liberals in that era were far more, I think, progressive than Bernie Sanders is. But I mean, the Democratic Party is more afraid of Bernie Sanders than it is of actually maybe another Trump administration, even, because the stuff that Sanders is pimping is actually pretty popular. I mean, people want, and Medicare for all is not a difficult proposition. It's all over the world, and people are suffering these, especially with COVID related intense medical bills. Who is it now? One country is now no longer, was it Australia? Will no longer cover COVID costs for people who are not vaccinated, which I'm not sure that's a great idea. But my point is, like, if you look even on that issue, right, like 60% of Americans want mask mandates and vaccination mandates. Like, corporate America is all behind that, right? So this is not an issue yet. As soon as something like that comes out, some asshole GOP nut job says, the American people don't want that. We're going to use that against you. And it's just a fucking bluff, right? And yet the Democrats fall for it. I mean, it's the equivalent of pull my finger, and they fall for it. They are gutless. They are scared. They are elitist. I think they're elitist. I think that, to me, yeah, there's racism. Anytime you got swastikas and Confederate flags out in public, and calling things like the Kung flu and shit. I mean, it's no longer in the shadows, which isn't necessarily a bad thing. But so that's true. There's that. I don't know. I hope I'm not naive. I don't think 60% of Americans believe that. I don't think, I mean, corporate America and the JCS was against the Confederate flag, and NASCAR was against the Confederate flag, and Harley Davidson was tweeting out messages of support for Black Lives Matter. But the Democrats have been made to, it's this battered political party syndrome, I'm going to be good to you next time, I don't know. I got nothing. What do you think? You're on the front lines. You're with the movers and shakers of the activist community. I'm just with a bunch of, faculty lounge, Ivy League people, who like to talk about theory and Derrida and tropes of meaning and, gender and culture and stuff like that. So.
I mean, I think it's pretty, one thing I think is actually pretty amazing is that, most, like, on issues that I work on in my work is like around climate and around fossil fuels and things like that. Many Americans feel that something needs to happen on the climate crisis. I do feel like a lot of these politicians, both Democrat and Republican, are captured by industry on certain issues, which I think is part of the problem. But I really actually do believe that the coastal elite perspective, which is also pervasive in the nonprofit industrial complex where I work, is a huge part of the problem. And I also think that at a certain level, I agree that that sort of vocal minority who support the Trumps of the world, I do think that there's like a huge amount of racial animus there. But then I also think, I don't think that the solution for the coastal elites or for activists, not all activists do this, but some activists is like to call everyone who supports Trump a racist. I don't think that's actually a winning strategy. And I also find it interesting that I don't think the Republicans actually have much of a strategy other than just to be as bold and outrageous as possible. And that they've captured certain state legislatures and they've captured certain political offices, and they're just going as far as they can with that until someone stops them, and then there's no one to stop them. I think that's a piece of what's going on. The other thing that we want to talk about in the Week in Review today is around the recalls. And so there have been like two notable recalls that have made the news. One is
recounts.
Recounts. I'm sorry. I keep saying recall. It's because I'm in California.
You're in California.
I even have it typed as recalls in my notes. I don't know what's going on here. But in Arizona, the recount, basically in Maricopa County or what have you, where they were actually said they were doing it in secret. It was being done anonymously by a company called Cyber Ninja. They were doing
Colorado. Didn't they take the ballots to Colorado?
Oh, I thought, were they? Oh, did they?
No, I think they took the ballots out of state.
Of course they did.
Remember, they said there were bamboo in the ballot. The bamboo
That's what I was going to say.
So they had to be in China, because the Chinese would never fucking think to like make paper ballots. You know, those people are inscrutable. They just are.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I mean, and so that recount came back, you know, saying that Biden won, right? Even though the wing nuts in the Republican legislature in Arizona, I mean, they just had to kind of fold. The other recount that is of note is the Texas recount. And so I think you actually speak to this much better, Bob, but I one thing, friends and relatives out there, I want to say about the Texas recount is that it's being initiated by the Texas Republican Party or some Texas Republican.
Yeah, Abbott or whatever. Abbott,
yeah, by Greg Abbott, right? Yeah, big operative in Texas. But like they're wanting to do a recount and they won. I mean,
well, I think it's because they saw
it's happening in your county there.
I think Texas officials saw Arizona officials go like really batshit crazy, and they thought, hey, it's like with Florida. Like Florida started like, you know, getting really nutty and catching up. So Texas like, oh, we gotta like, you know, you're allowed to have a gun anywhere. Women aren't allowed to have any rights. You know, we're gonna kill people by freezing them to death. Like anytime they think there's a challenge from another state, like Texas doubles down. But you know, even before this, several months ago, the I think Secretary of State, I can't remember. I would assume it's the Secretary of State, the top election official in Texas, a Republican woman, was forced to resign because right after the elections last November, she said the elections in Texas were clean and accurate. And the Republicans forced her to resign. And again, as you pointed out, the GOP didn't just win these elections, they scored way better than all the pre-election polling indicated. I mean, Biden, you know, for a time there, a week before, Biden was pumping money into Texas. The Democrats thought they had a shot. They thought they were going to take the state legislature. They got blasted, and they want to recount. Like, the fuck are they going to find? You know, I mean, Harris County's Democrat. Harris County's blue. Probably, I mean, like Lena Hidalgo's definitely in there in the crosshairs because she's actually, I think, as far as elected officials go, and I don't know about all over the country, but she's pretty good. I mean, she's a Democrat. She's fairly progressive. She's adamant. She's aggressive. She's taken on Abbott over COVID, over voting, you know, all this stuff. A young Latina, which I'm sure the old boys really freaking despised, you know, in Texas especially. And I mean, I would, you know, certainly give her, I mean, she's the head of the, what, third or fourth biggest county in the United States. So she's far, you know, actually has a far more important position than AOC or anybody in the squad does. And I mean, she's taken them on, but I don't know. I mean, but, you know, kind of what we said before, one thing that kind of struck me is the Republican Party is now starting to haul out sickles and hammers again to attack the Democrats, right? I mean, the Soviet Union, well, I have one in my bag, right? But that's from the Jordanian Communist Party. It's just nostalgia, basically, right? The Soviet Union fell apart in 1991. There is no communism. There's no Marxism. And this is all they have. Like in Georgia, we've said this many times. In Georgia, an African-American and a Jewish guy were elected to the Senate on January 5th. And the entire Republican argument against them was they're going to defund the police and they're socialists. And they won. You had the Democratic
radical
socialists, right? So I've heard people say that. Well, Kamala Harris is communist. We're gonna have like, dude. Like I'm, you know, I would know. I know. Like there's a few of us in the country, not many, but I think we know each other. And
her Wall Street donors might have something to say about that.
Yeah, if Kamala was one of us, I think we'd know, right? We'd have seen her at the meeting, or she'd know the secret handshake or something. But yeah, I don't know. I've got nothing. I just couldn't rant. But I think the key, like I would say to people out there, is it's just really easy to attack the stupid shit that the Democrats. I'm sorry, that the Republicans and Trump and Abbott and Hawley, because they're reprehensible, they're loathsome. They are, yeah, clearly the biggest danger in the entire country, no doubt. But at some point, you know, like you have to get somebody to fight it. You need a resistance. And there is, you know, we've talked, there's like last summer was a great example of that. There was a resistance and shit got done. But, you know, it helps to have a political resistance because, you know, we're not, you know, revolution isn't imminent. And I think, you can attack Trump and all, they don't give a shit. I think they actually kind of enjoy it. They double down. And I think they troll. They're pretty good at trolling liberals too, because they know what'll get them worked up. But you have to kind of clean your own house first. And if you continue to have a party led by people from New York and San Francisco, and who is it? Hakeem Jeffries now is probably gonna, when Pelosi finally steps down, Hakeem Jeffries, who's from Manhattan, isn't he? Is going to become like the speaker, either the Speaker of the House or the House Minority Leader, right? And so you're replacing somebody from San Francisco with somebody from Manhattan. The Democratic Party. I'm not saying the Democratic Party should, cater. I'm not Roy Teixeira that, you should do whatever white guys want. That's bullshit. That's obviously bullshit, right? At the same time, this kind of New York, San Francisco axis thing ain't helping you. It wouldn't hurt to get some people from Ohio and Iowa and Pennsylvania and Georgia and places like that. Georgia is encouraging, and Arizona is encouraging. Shit can get done. Well, Sinema isn't, because is Sinema as stupid as like Marjorie Taylor Greene and Matt Gaetz, or is she just evil?
She's definitely on her own program. I'm not quite sure.
What gets me is because I see Democrats defending her. She ran as a Democrat. She raised shit tons of money, didn't she? Didn't she have a huge war chest in that campaign?
Yeah.
So that came from Democrats. So they gave her I forget what, 80 million or something. They gave her money to be a fucking Democrat. The Democrats won the Senate, and now she and Manchin are, monkey wrenching the entire. They're Trump's best friends right now. They are Trump's, just like Hillary Clinton was. Every time people bitch about Kavanaugh and Gorsuch and Barrett, it's thank Hillary Clinton. I get such venom about that, and I'm not backing down on that. Why is Stephen Breyer still on the Supreme Court? Why is Dianne Feinstein still your senator? It's insane. The GOP, would just send these people out fishing with Al Neri, as we've said many times. I don't know.
Anthony Kennedy stepped down in 2018.
There were no rumors of no health issues, nothing. And Tony Kennedy, he was in good shape, blah, blah, blah. His son was working for Deutsche Bank, and boom, next thing you know, Kennedy resigns.
It's also important to note that they did that in an election year where they were, 2018 was actually a big year for the Democrats, but the Kavanaugh confirmation is actually something that probably steered a couple of Senate races back to the GOP. And it's definitely,
I don't know about that. I still question that, because Kavanaugh's never was popular. I don't know. One thing. Oh, good. I'm sorry.
I was just going to say it seemed to fire people up in North Dakota and Missouri and Indiana. So
yeah, maybe. Although Heidi, when you got Height Camp and what was the McCaskill? I think they were kind of,
that's true,
dead people walking anyway. But here's a good example though. I was in Ohio last October because of COVID, and Amy Coney Barrett, who was clearly going to be confirmed. And Ohio has two senators, Rob Portman, who's going to vote no matter what Trump wanted, and Sherrod Brown, who's a Democrat, right? There was no question about Ohio senators. The Ohio TV stations were slammed for a week, for that week there where the hearings and everything they were slammed with ads saying, call your senator to tell them to confirm Amy Coney Barrett, right? And there's no point. There was wasted money because there was no reason. She was going to be confirmed then, and especially in Ohio, the vote was. The Democrats don't do that when there's really an issue. They don't even do that when there's something at stake and when they could maybe win it. This is just a throwaway. This is just wasted money, and yet Ohio was slammed. These Amy Coney Barrett commercials were on nonstop for about a week. Football games, TV shows, baseball, whatever, you name it. And the GOP took that seriously, even though it was a slam dunk. And you never see the Democrats do that, even on issues. Plus, there's this whole matter of all they care about is we got to win the presidency. What about maybe helping people out? I would think that the fact that how many millions of people might be evicted in the next few months should be an issue of that's actually kind of a humanitarian calamity. I'm more concerned about the Afghans than they are about Americans being evicted, and I'm not saying that in any kind of nationalistic way. I'm just saying you'll hear more rhetoric from certain people, about that and the eviction of Americans. Nothing. I believe Afghans. In fact, Harris County has actually passed a resolution welcoming Afghans. So Afghans are welcome, but Haitians are going to beat the shit out of you. You know, like Texas welcomes Afghans, right? Except for, who was it? One of the Texas reps actually just said that they shouldn't be allowed in because they're terrorists and they're going to have anchor babies. So
I missed that item in the
yeah, because pretty soon, you know, they'll be like the 0.001 of Texas might be Afghan, and they'll, God knows what they'll do, right? This state, like, you know what gets me is Texas liberals are a unique brand, like Austin, but Houston has plenty of them too. And, you know, keep Austin weird, and they wear tie-dye shirts, and they talk about, you know, Texas music and Billy Joe Shaver and the brisket here is so great. And they fucking ignore, this is a desolate, medieval, horrific, cruel, ignorant, backward, racist, misogynist place, but it has great brisket and great music, you know? And I mean, the Texas Democratic Party is just pathetic. I mean, a poll came out the other day, Matthew McConaughey, who may run for governor, and at this point, like, I think people probably are hoping he does, is actually ahead of Greg Abbott, like, kind of, you know, by a decent margin. But Beto O'Rourke is behind Abbott. Now, you know, he hasn't officially announced he's running, but Greg Abbott has like killed, like literally killed like 50, 60,000 people. He refuses to allow mask mandates. Like I'm in a classroom with 300, two times a week, 2 classes each of 300 people, like half of whom maybe are wearing masks. And like, you know, I'm not even allowed, you know, theoretically to mention it. I'm not even allowed to say to them, you know, sorry about that. I'm bumping it. I'm getting excited. I'm ranting so hard that the camera's moving. So, you know, and this guy is like, so he's killing people. During the freeze, 700 people died, and he took care of the oil company, you know, the energy companies. Some people were given like thousands of, you know, bills for thousands of dollars, and they had no, you know, out. And then
he used it. He and Rick Perry and others use it as an attack opportunity on the Green New Deal.
Yeah,
And to the right-wing media instead of paying attention to what was going on at home while people were without water and without power.
yeah, and you know, this abortion bill, like the majority of pro-life Texans oppose it, right? The majority of pro-life Texans are I mean, it's insane. It puts bounties. It's like the fugitive slave law. In fact, the first two whatever claims were filed, they were by men from out of state. Like, how the fuck does that work? I thought it was people in Texas. I thought you had to be in Texas. Like, one guy was from Pennsylvania, the other one's from I forget where, who filed claims now because some doctor wrote an op-ed saying I'm still doing abortions, right? It's like the most batshit crazy place. I know I get in trouble all the time for saying it's like the Taliban, but it's like the fucking Taliban. You know, it's insane. And liberals are the fucking problem. We've been saying that like the first show. We've kind of gotten away from that, but like I think it's time that we start reminding people again. Like, you know, you can bitch about Trump, you can bitch about Abbott, but you know, saying vote in 2024 probably isn't going to be like the best solution. I got an email today, some group in Ohio, because they're redistricting, right? In Ohio, the state constitution says that redistricting should be based on the apportionment should be based on the partisan breakdown of recent elections. And I think recent elections have gone like 54 to 46 Republican, right? So theoretically, I don't know how many seats there are in Ohio, but 54% would be, you know, GOP, and then 46% would be Democrat. So it would be fairly close. The Ohio GOP has instead decided that since, the Republican Party has won 13 of the last 16 elections, it should be whatever that percentage is, 70 or 80%, right? So they should get 80% of the seats, right? You know, this is like fairly big, right? I'm getting these emails saying, sign a petition and make sure you vote in 2024, right? That's their solution. Vote in 2024. That was like that, you know, like Paul Dead End Street and the Unhinged Nuts. Trump's a fascist. Trump's a fascist. Vote in 2020. Like fascism in the streets, you know? The fucking left, you know, somebody writes a tweet and they get upset. Like, dude, if the country's fascist, you know, and you're crying over a fucking tweet, like, come on, we need to toughen up. We need to fucking toughen up.
Yeah.
I'm sorry. That's not a gendered construct there. Like, tough. Like, toughest people I've ever met were the Italian women I grew up with. I was scared of them. My mother could throw a shoe or hit you with a wooden spoon. So, like, the left needs to fucking toughen up.
Yeah. Yeah, totally.
Anyway, are we gonna actually like keep this in, or?
It's up to you.
No, it's cool. But if you call Greg Abbott's office, just spell my name right. Okay. So
we should probably wrap. We're probably a little over time.
Yeah.
folks, this has been the Week in Review, talking about all of your favorite topics with our special green and red, griping and ranting sort of flavor and perspective. Check us out on all social media channels, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, YouTube. Hit that subscribe button. And also, if you want to make a donation, go to greenredpodcast.org, hit the support button, or become a patron at patreon.com/greenredpodcast. And we will see you next week, if not sooner. Bye.